Haze machines are easily one of the coolest tools we get to use as filmmakers. They can really make your footage pop and add to the tone of your film or project. But are you using it right? Having used my personal Haze machine for several years now, I have some tips to help you get the best results when you go to use one as well. So let's get right into it. Starting with tip number 1, keep it thin. If you don't use a Haze machine often, it's easy to get carried away with the amount of haze you're using. I mean, I don't blame you, they're a lot of fun. But we just want to create atmosphere with our Haze machine and not a cloud of smoke like you would see with a fog machine. And if you want to learn more about atmosphere and what it means to add atmosphere to your films, check out this video up here and I break it down in a lot greater detail. Now, getting back on track, keeping your haze thin will also allow you to maintain more contrast while still getting those beautiful light streaks coming through a window and that soft halation that you're after. Tip number 2 is fan it out. Not properly fanning out your haze is probably one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen. And by fan it out, I'm referring to spreading it out evenly throughout the space that you're shooting in. If you don't, you'll get these little swirls of smoke throughout your image and it can be pretty distracting, and it's even more noticeable if there's a strong beam of light in your frame. The simplest way to fan it out is to take a small flag or even a foam board and just wave it around until the entire space is filled. If you're shooting in a bedroom or anywhere with a ceiling fan, you can fan with the fan. Then once you're done and it's spread out evenly, you'll have a perfectly uniform look. Since we're on the topic of fans, tip number 3 is to turn off the fan. Reason being, if you leave it on while you're shooting, you could still get those little swirls of smoke we're trying to avoid, especially if you're using a water-based hazer like myself. Which brings me to my next tip, which is choose the right haze fluid for you and your shooting situation. In case you didn't know, there are 2 different types of haze machines you can get. Those that are oil-based and those that are water-based, like the one that I use. They each have pros and cons, so I'll just name a couple of the big ones. Oil-based hangs in the air longer. The haze is also smoother because of the smaller particles than water-based. And there's no startup, warm-up time or anything like that. You turn it on and you instantly get it. You turn it off, it instantly stops. However, it's not advised or even really safe to breathe in over long periods of time, especially in small confined spaces. And if it's used in a space often, it will leave residue on everything over time. Everything. Water-based, on the other hand, is non-toxic. It doesn't require any cleanup because it's not leaving residue, but it doesn't hang in the air nearly as long at all. It requires more fluid to run typically, and overall the haze isn't as smooth, especially if you don't fan it out. For me personally, the whole I can breathe this stuff in thing is why I decided to get a water-based hazer, but make sure you do your research and choose whichever one makes sense for your shooting scenario. Now on to our next tip, which is once you start, do not stop. Using haze will change the way your image looks quite a bit. It lowers contrast, softens your light sources, and helps wrap your light around your subject. Just to show you an example, here's a shot without haze, and here it is again with. You can see the difference it made visually, as well as in our false color. Shot for shot, these 2 images would not match well together, unless obviously it was for some sort of creative choice. Here's a tip based on a question I get asked all the time, which is what about smoke detectors? Some smoke detectors, but not all, will be set off by haze machines, and sometimes it can be difficult to know exactly which ones will and won't go off and ruin your day. So these small ones that you typically find throughout your house that take the little 9-volt battery can take a small, thin layer of haze before going off, in most cases. Whereas some commercial spaces will have extremely sensitive smoke detectors, like this one. This little dude right here, whatever this type of smoke detector is called, you will set it off every single time. The first time I encountered one of these lovely little smoke detectors, I evacuated an entire apartment building, and it wasn't a small one, and I don't recommend it. Now, on the other hand, other commercial spaces use heat-based sprinkler systems opposed to smoke detectors, and if that's the case, it's all gravy. You're not going to set it off unless you set the building on fire. So, there you go. Now we have a tip for shooting in the middle of the day. If your goal with haze is to get, say, light streaks coming through a window, and you're shooting an interior in the middle of the day, pay attention, this one's very important. As we all know, in the middle of the day, there's a whole lot of ambient light that is filling an interior space because of the lovely sun. Now, because of this, if you want to get those light streaks coming in through a window, you're going to need a very large light source Now, could you just use the sun? Of course, but that leads to a whole lot of other challenges that we're not going to talk about right now. There's simply too much ambient light in an interior space because of the sun, and small fixtures unfortunately just can't compete. You can work around this, and that is to block out as much natural light as possible, and if at all possible, all of it, or you can simply just shoot at night. Our final tip may seem like a small one, but trust me, it is extremely important, and that is to bring an extension cord. I mean, look how long the cord is off of this thing. Like, why? This is embarrassing. For whatever reason, these things come with the world's shortest cords. This makes for getting an extension cord a huge pain, especially if you're in a space without power or even just an outlet close by, which is more than you might think. And there it is, some practical tips to help you get the best results when using a Haze machine, as well as avoid some of the common issues when using one. If you've never used one before, I highly recommend you at least rent one because it's usually super cheap, and just see if you like the look or not. As always, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I'll see you again in the next video.